Remember these 30 forgotten Betty Crocker church supper recipes?
They have something special in the way of a sandwich in mind. Sally calls it Tuna Rarebit.
They once filled crowded basements with golden casseroles, laughter, and steaming cups of percolator coffee.
Edge with 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs, mixed with 1 tablespoon of melted butter.
Each dish stretched nickels into feasts and turned neighbors into family.
And why not? They're looking forward to an important date, dinner at home with the family.
Some vanished, others evolved, but wait until you see number 25. It left everyone speechless. Funeral potatoes. Why did they call them funeral potatoes when they brought so much life to every gathering? Picture walking into the basement of First Lutheran Church in Salt Lake City, 1963, where Sister Margaret pulls bubbling casseroles from ancient ovens that have seen decades of comfort food creation. The genius wasn't just in the name, but in the brilliant economics of comfort that turned simple ingredients into emotional healing. Frozen hash browns, cream of chicken soup, sour cream, butter, and that magical crunchy cornflake topping that made grief bearable and joy memorable for generations of families. The story behind this dish is pure American ingenuity at its finest. During the 1950s, when frozen foods were still a novelty and convenience meant everything to busy church ladies, someone discovered that frozen hash browns held their texture better than fresh potatoes when baked in cream sauce. Green bean casserole with crispy onions. Could 3 simple cans really create America's most copied side dish? Step into any church kitchen in November 1955, where Dorcas Campbell from the Campbell Soup Company demonstrates her revolutionary creation to wide-eyed church ladies gathered around folding tables covered in checkered tablecloths. The brilliance lay in the perfect trinity of convenience that would change American holiday tables forever. This wasn't just a recipe, it was a cultural revolution wrapped in a casserole dish. Before 1955, green bean dishes required fresh beans, hand-trimmed and blanched, expensive cream, and complicated sauces that could break if you looked at them wrong. Dorcas changed everything with her genius combination. Tuna noodle casserole. Who knew that 5 pantry staples could save dinner when unexpected guests arrived at your door? Transport yourself to the kitchen of Rose Miller in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, 1958, as she whips up comfort for her bridge club in 20 minutes flat, while the ladies wait in the living room, completely unaware that dinner started with a can opener and a prayer. The secret weapon wasn't just convenience, but the silk-smooth sauce that made everyone forget this was considered poor food during the Depression. Egg noodles, canned tuna, cream of mushroom soup, frozen peas, and buttered breadcrumbs created magic from mundane ingredients that most families already had sitting in their pantries. The technique was pure efficiency in motion. You'd boil the wide egg noodles until just tender, never overcooked, because they'd finish in the oven, drain the tuna gently so it stayed in meaty chunks rather than turning to mush. Fold everything into heated soup that had been thinned with just a splash of milk. Try ham and scalloped potatoes. How did leftover Easter ham become the star of every potluck for the next 3 months? This wasn't just about using leftovers. This was about transforming them into something so spectacular that people actually looked forward to the Monday after Easter more than the holiday itself. The magic wasn't just in the layering, but in the perfect marriage of salty meat and creamy starch that created harmony in every single bite, proving that the best dishes often came from necessity rather than luxury. Chicken Divan. Could broccoli really become the star of Sunday dinner when most kids wouldn't touch it? The secret wasn't hiding the broccoli, but celebrating it with such rich company that resistance became impossible. Fresh broccoli spears, tender chicken breast, creamy Mornay sauce enriched with sherry, and a golden cap of parmesan and paprika that made everyone forget this was healthy. You'd blanch the broccoli until bright green but still crisp, layer it with sliced chicken in buttered dishes, smother everything in cheese sauce spiked with cooking sherry. then broil until bubbling and bronze. The real genius was in the sauce, a classic Mornay that turned vegetables into velvet luxury. What made Chicken Divan particularly brilliant was how it elevated humble ingredients into something elegant enough for the fanciest church supper. Tater Tot Hotdish. Who decided that frozen potato nuggets could crown the perfect comfort casserole? The brilliance wasn't just in the crispy crown, but in how it sealed in all the flavors below. Ground beef, cream of mushroom soup, frozen mixed vegetables, and that golden layer of tater tots that made every kid forget to complain. You'd brown the beef with onions until fragrant, drain the fat, stir in undiluted soup and vegetables, spread in greased pans, then arrange tots like little golden soldiers across the top. Here's the real magic. Those tots would crisp and brown, while the bottom stayed creamy and rich, creating perfect texture contrast in every bite. Bisquick Chicken Pot Pie. Could a box of baking mix really replace hours of pastry making for busy church cooks? The genius wasn't just in the shortcut, but in how it made comfort food accessible to even nervous bakers. Cooked chicken, mixed vegetables, chicken broth, milk, and that magical biscuit topping that baked into golden biscuit-like perfection. You'd mix the chicken and vegetables with seasoned broth in deep casserole dishes, then drop spoonfuls of biscuit batter, enriched with milk right on top like fluffy clouds. The real brilliance was watching that batter spread and rise into a tender golden crust that rivaled any pastry. What made this particularly valuable was how it transformed Sunday's leftover chicken into Monday's dinner triumph without any advanced cooking skills. The Arkansas Democrat called it the pot pie that saves the day in their 1968 homemaker section. Creamy chicken and rice bake. How did one pan become the answer to feeding crowds without constant stirring or watching? The secret wasn't just in the one-pan convenience, but in how the rice absorbed every drop of flavor while staying perfectly tender. Long-grain rice, chicken pieces, cream of chicken soup, onion soup mix, and enough milk to create magic in the oven. You'd layer raw rice in buttered pans, nestle chicken pieces on top, mix the soups with milk until smooth, pour over everything, then cover tight and let the oven work its magic. Here's where it gets incredible. The rice would cook in the chicken juices and creamy sauce, becoming incredibly flavorful while the chicken stayed moist and tender. What made this dish particularly genius was how it required zero babysitting, yet delivered results that looked like hours of careful attention. Ham-Macaroni Bake. What made this simple pasta dish the glue that held every church supper together? The magic wasn't just in the stretchy cheese pull, but in how it made everyone feel like family around the same table. Elbow macaroni, diced ham, sharp cheddar cheese, milk, butter, and just enough flour to bind it all into creamy perfection. You'd cook the macaroni until just tender, toss with butter and flour, fold in ham and most of the cheese, moisten with warm milk, then top with remaining cheese for that golden, bubbly finish. The real genius was in the texture. Tender pasta, salty ham bits, and that incredible cheese stretch that made every forkful a celebration. What made Ham-Macaroni Bake worth its weight in gold was how it transformed holiday leftovers into a dish that disappeared faster than the original ham. Scalloped corn casserole. How did sweet corn become the surprise star of the Midwest comfort food scene? The brilliance wasn't just in the custard-like texture, but in how it bridged the gap between side dish and dessert without being either. Cream-style corn, whole kernel corn, sour cream, melted butter, cornbread mix, and eggs that bound it all into golden perfection. You'd combine both corns with sour cream and melted butter, fold in dry cornbread mix and beaten eggs, pour into buttered dishes, then bake until set and golden like summer sunshine. Here's where it gets magical. The texture was neither bread nor pudding, but something entirely unique that satisfied like both. What made this dish particularly special was how it celebrated corn in a way that made it the star rather than just a supporting player. Impossible Cheeseburger Pie. Could Bisquick really create its own crust while baking, or was this just wishful thinking from busy mothers? The revolutionary concept wasn't just convenience, but the pure kitchen wizardry that made skeptics into believers. Ground beef, chopped onions, shredded cheese, Bisquick mix, milk, and eggs that somehow sorted themselves into perfect pie layers in the oven. You'd brown the beef with onions, spread in greased pie pans, top with cheese, then pour over a simple batter of Bisquick, milk, and eggs beaten together. Here's the real magic. During baking, the batter would sink to form a bottom crust, stay in the middle as filling, and rise to create a top crust all by itself. What made this dish spread like wildfire was how it delivered homemade pie satisfaction with almost no effort or skill required. Tamale Pie. How did Mexican flavors find their way into conservative church kitchens across the Midwest? The genius wasn't just in the exotic flavors, but in how familiar ingredients created something that felt both foreign and comfortingly American. Ground beef, onions, tomato sauce, chili powder, corn kernels, and a cornbread topping that sealed in all the southwestern magic below. You'd brown the beef with onions and spices until fragrant, stir in tomato sauce and corn, simmer until thick, then crown with cornbread batter that baked into golden perfection. The real brilliance was how the cornbread absorbed just enough of the chili flavors to tie everything together while staying distinctly bread-like on top. Chili-Mac Casserole. Who decided that two beloved comfort foods needed to get married in a casserole dish? The magic wasn't just in the marriage, but in how each element made the other better rather than competing for attention. Elbow macaroni, homemade chili, shredded cheddar cheese, and enough sour cream to cool the heat while adding richness that made everything luxurious. You'd cook the macaroni until just tender, layer it with thick chili in buttered pans, top with generous amounts of cheese, then bake until bubbly and irresistible. Here's where it gets incredible. The pasta absorbed some chili flavors, while the cheese melted into stretchy perfection that made every bite a celebration. What made this dish worth its weight in gold was how it satisfied both mac and cheese lovers and chili fanatics with one perfect compromise. The Kansas City Star called it the casserole that ends arguments in their 1975 church supper feature. 7-layer supper casserole. Could you really just stack ingredients without mixing and still create a perfect meal? Enter the experimental kitchen of Grace Presbyterian Church in Denver, 1975, where innovative cook Dorothy Chen discovers that gravity and steam can do most of the cooking work. The brilliance wasn't just in the no-stir approach, but in how each layer contributed its own flavor while melding into harmonious perfection. Raw rice, chopped onions, ground beef, sliced potatoes, green beans, tomato sauce, and cheese that created 7 distinct layers of pure comfort. You'd spread each ingredient in its own even layer without stirring, season each level lightly, cover tightly, then let the oven work its magic for 90 minutes. Here's the real genius. The moisture from vegetables and sauce would steam the rice, while the beef drippings flavored everything below, creating complex flavors without any complicated techniques. What made this dish particularly revolutionary was how it proved that good cooking didn't always require constant attention or professional skills. The Denver Post featured it as the casserole that cooks itself in their 1976 Working Mother series. Modern one-pot restaurants charge $17.99 for similar layered concepts that cost $1 to feed 10 people in 1975. Wait until you see how Sloppy Joe Biscuit Bake made messy food tidy. Sloppy Joe Biscuit Bake. How do you make America's messiest sandwich into a neat, shareable dish? Picture the creative kitchen of Fellowship Baptist Church in Nashville, 1973, where youth group coordinator Susan Lee solves the eternal Sloppy Joe problem with one brilliant innovation. The genius wasn't just in containing the mess, but in how biscuit topping transformed familiar flavors into something entirely new and better. Ground beef, onions, tomato sauce, brown sugar, vinegar, and refrigerated biscuits that created a golden lid over all that tangy, sweet comfort. You'd brown the beef with onions until fragrant, stir in sauce ingredients and simmer until thick, spread in greased pans, then top with separated biscuits that would puff and brown like golden clouds. Here's where it gets magical. The biscuits absorb just enough sauce to be flavorful while staying fluffy and bread-like, creating perfect texture contrast. What made this dish spread like wildfire was how it solved the portability problem that kept sloppy joes from church events while making them even more satisfying. The Nashville Tennessean called it the sandwich that grew up in their 1974 church supper showcase. Today, comfort food restaurants charge $11.49 for gourmet versions of what cost 65 cents to feed 8 kids back then. Here's where Swiss steak bake melts, like a hymn's last note. Swiss steak bake. Who knew that tough cuts of beef could become fork-tender poetry in a casserole dish? Transport yourself to the kitchen of St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Cleveland, 1976, where head cook Anna Kowalski transforms budget meat into Sunday dinner elegance through the magic of slow braising. The secret wasn't just in the long cooking, but in how tomatoes and onions work together to break down tough fibers while building incredible flavor. Round steak, flour for dredging, onions, canned tomatoes, and just enough herbs to make it sing without overwhelming the beef's natural richness. You'd pound the steak, dredge in seasoned flour, brown in hot oil until crusty, layer with sliced onions and tomatoes, then cover tight and braise until it practically fell apart at the touch of a fork. The real brilliance was in the sauce that developed, rich, tomatoey, and infused with beef drippings that made everything taste like it had been cooking for generations. What made Swiss steak bake particularly valuable was how it turned the cheapest cuts into something worthy of special occasions through patience and technique. The Cleveland Plain Dealer featured it as the dish that makes tough times tender in their 1977 budget cooking series. Modern steakhouses charge $24.99 for braised beef dishes that cost $1.50 to feed 6 people in 1976. Wait until you discover how Cabbage Roll Casserole delivered all the flavor without the rolling. Cabbage Roll Casserole. Why spend hours rolling individual cabbage leaves when you could layer everything and get the same incredible flavors? Step into the practical kitchen of Holy Family Church in Pittsburgh, 1978, where cook Helen Novak revolutionizes a labor-intensive classic by thinking outside traditional methods. The genius wasn't just in saving time, but in how the layered approach actually distributed flavors more evenly than individual rolls ever could. Chopped cabbage, ground beef, rice, onions, tomato sauce, and enough seasoning to make every bite taste like stuffed cabbage without the stuffing work. You'd layer raw cabbage with seasoned beef and rice mixture, pour tomato sauce over everything, cover tightly, then let steam and time create the magic that usually required hours of careful rolling. Here's where it gets incredible. The cabbage would wilt and meld with the meat, while the rice absorbed all those wonderful flavors, creating harmony in every forkful. What made this dish particularly brilliant was how it democratized a classic that many cooks found too intimidating or time-consuming to attempt. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette called it the shortcut that doesn't shortchange flavor in their 1979 time-saving cooking feature. Today, Eastern European restaurants charge $15.99 for traditional cabbage rolls that cost 90 cents to recreate in casserole form back then. Here's where beef stroganoff casserole becomes sour cream silk luxury. Beef stroganoff casserole. How did a sophisticated Russian dish become accessible to every church cook in America? Picture the elegant adaptation happening at Trinity Episcopal Church in Boston, 1977, where cook Margaret O'Sullivan transforms restaurant complexity into potluck simplicity without losing any of the luxurious appeal. The magic wasn't just in the simplification, but in how the casserole method actually improved the texture while making it foolproof for nervous cooks. Ground beef, mushrooms, onions, sour cream, cream of mushroom soup, and egg noodles that created all the Stroganoff magic in one easy pan. You'd brown the beef with mushrooms and onions until fragrant, stir in soup and sour cream off the heat, toss with cooked noodles, then bake until bubbly and golden on top. The real brilliance was how the oven heat gently warmed everything together without curdling the sour cream, creating that signature silky sauce that made Stroganoff famous. What made this dish particularly valuable was how it brought restaurant elegance to church suppers while remaining completely approachable for home cooks of any skill level. The Boston Globe featured it as the casserole that brings fine dining home in their 1978 entertaining series. Modern Russian restaurants charge $18.99 for traditional stroganoff that cost $1.25 to feed 8 people in casserole form back then. Wait until you see how Chicken Tetrazzini created golden memories with every forkful. Chicken Tetrazzini. Could leftover chicken really become more delicious than the original roast dinner? Enter the transformative kitchen of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in San Francisco, 1974, where cook Isabella Romano turns Sunday's leftovers into Monday's masterpiece through the magic of cream sauce and pasta. The brilliance wasn't just in the recycling, but in how simple ingredients created complexity that rivaled any Italian restaurant. Cooked chicken, thin spaghetti, mushrooms, butter, flour, cream, Parmesan cheese, and just enough sherry to make it sophisticated without being intimidating. You'd sauté mushrooms in butter, make a classic cream sauce with flour and cream, fold in chicken and cooked spaghetti, add sherry and cheese, then bake until golden and bubbly like edible sunshine. Here's where it gets magical. The pasta absorbed flavors, while the top formed a gorgeous golden crust that cracked to reveal creamy perfection underneath. What made Chicken Tetrazzini particularly special was how it elevated humble leftovers into something elegant enough for company while being comforting enough for family. The San Francisco Chronicle called it the dish that makes leftovers luxury in their 1975 Waste Not feature. Modern Italian restaurants charge $16.49 for what cost 80 cents to transform leftover chicken in 1974. Here's where Turkey Divan gives holiday leftovers their most glorious second life. Turkey Divan. How did Thanksgiving leftovers become more anticipated than the original feast? Picture the brilliant kitchen of Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Minneapolis, 1976, where cook Ruth Anderson discovers that turkey and broccoli in cream sauce creates magic that makes everyone forget about the holiday meal entirely. Genius wasn't just in using leftovers, but in how the combination created flavors that were entirely new and somehow better than the sum of their parts. Sliced turkey, fresh broccoli, butter, flour, milk, sharp cheddar, and just enough curry powder to add mystery without overwhelming traditional tastes. You'd blanch broccoli until bright green, layer with turkey and buttered dishes, make rich cheese sauce with butter and flour, season with a whisper of curry, then broil until golden and gorgeous. The real magic was in that hint of curry that made everyone try to guess the secret ingredient while cleaning their plates completely. What made Turkey Divan particularly brilliant was how it transformed holiday fatigue into anticipation for something completely different, yet comfortingly familiar. The Minneapolis Tribune featured it as the leftover that outshines the original in their 1977 holiday cooking series. Modern upscale cafes charge $14.99 for what cost 75 cents to create from Thanksgiving leftovers back then. Brace yourself, because now come the rings, crowns, and those incredible "did we really make that era" dishes. Porcupine Meatballs. Who looked at rice-studded meatballs and decided they resembled cute little woodland creatures? Step into the whimsical kitchen of Riverside Community Church in Sacramento, 1979, where cook Janet Kim creates comfort food that makes kids giggle while satisfying adult appetites completely. The brilliance wasn't just in the playful appearance, but in how the rice created incredible texture while stretching the meat to feed more people. Ground beef, uncooked rice, onions, eggs, tomato sauce, and enough seasoning to make each bite a perfect balance of protein and grain. You'd mix raw rice right into the meat mixture, form into balls where rice grains stuck out like little quills, then simmer gently in seasoned tomato sauce until the rice was tender and the flavors melded perfectly. Here's where it gets incredible. The rice would cook in the sauce while absorbing flavors, creating meatballs that were more interesting and filling than traditional versions. What made Porcupine Meatballs particularly valuable was how they stretched expensive meat while adding visual interest that made kids excited about dinner. The Sacramento Bee called them the meatballs that make dinner fun in their 1980 family cooking feature. Modern comfort food restaurants charge $13.49 for what cost 95 cents to feed 6 people back then. Wait until you discover how Shipwreck Casserole rescued pantries across America. Shipwreck Casserole. Could a dish named after disaster really save dinner when the pantry looked bare? Enter the resourceful kitchen of First Christian Church in Tulsa, 1981, where cook Betty Morrison creates magic from whatever happens to be on hand, proving that desperation often births the most memorable meals. The genius wasn't just in the flexibility, but in how simple layers created complex flavors without requiring any advanced cooking techniques or exotic ingredients. Sliced potatoes, chopped onions, ground beef, canned tomatoes, and whatever vegetables were hiding in the back of the refrigerator, all layered like edible archaeology. You'd slice potatoes thin and layer them with onions, crumble raw ground beef over everything, add vegetables and canned tomatoes, season each layer, then cover tight and let the oven work its rescue magic. The real brilliance was how each ingredient cooked in the juices of the others, creating a harmony that tasted like it had been planned by a master chef instead of thrown together in desperation. What made Shipwreck Casserole particularly special was how it proved that good cooking was more about technique than expensive ingredients, and that families could eat well even when times were tough. The Tulsa World featured it as the dish that saves the day in their 1982 budget cooking series. Modern farm-to-table restaurants charge $15.99 for similar rustic dishes that cost 65 cents to improvise back then. Here's where Chow Noodle Casserole brings East meets Midwest magic to church socials. Chow Noodle Casserole. How did crunchy Chinese noodles find their way into Midwestern church basements? Picture the adventurous spirit of Grace Methodist Church in Des Moines, 1980, where cook Linda Chen introduces her church family to the magic of texture contrast that would revolutionize potluck thinking. The brilliance wasn't just in the cultural fusion, but in how crunchy noodles created surprise in every bite, while familiar flavors kept everyone comfortable. Cooked chicken, cream of mushroom soup, celery, onions, canned chow mein noodles, and just enough soy sauce to add mystery without overwhelming conservative palates. You'd mix chicken with vegetables and soup, fold in half the crunchy noodles for texture, spread in greased pans, then top with remaining noodles that would stay crispy and add visual appeal. Here's where it gets magical. The bottom noodles would soften slightly, while the top stayed crunchy, creating layers of texture that made every forkful interesting and different. What made this dish particularly revolutionary was how it introduced new flavors gradually, letting familiar ingredients bridge the gap to culinary adventure. The Des Moines Register called it the casserole that builds bridges in their 1981 cultural exchange feature. Modern Asian fusion restaurants charge $12.99 for what cost 75 cents to create this church social sensation back then. Just when you think you've seen everything, Meatloaf Surprise creates the reveal moment that stops conversation. Meatloaf Surprise. What made grown adults gasp when someone sliced into an ordinary-looking meatloaf? Transport yourself to the dramatic kitchen of Oak Hills Baptist Church in Birmingham, 1978, where cook Sarah Washington creates theater in the dining room with one brilliant hidden element that turns meatloaf into entertainment. The genius wasn't just in the surprise, but in how the hidden eggs added richness while creating that magical slice reveal moment that made everyone lean forward in anticipation. Sarah's inspiration came from her grandmother's Sunday suppers, where simple dishes were elevated through clever presentation that made children feel like they were witnessing magic. She remembered how her grandmother would create surprises in ordinary foods, coins in Christmas puddings, colored layers in jellied salads, and wondered how to bring that same sense of wonder to the humble meatloaf that fed her church family every month. The technique required careful planning and gentle hands. She'd start with 2 pounds of fresh ground beef, never the prepackaged variety that lost its texture, mixed with fine breadcrumbs soaked in whole milk until they formed a paste that would hold everything together without making the loaf dense. Yellow onions, minced so fine they disappeared into the mixture, provided sweetness that balanced the meat's richness, while fresh garlic added depth that made people wonder about her secret ingredient. But the real secret lay in the preparation of those hidden treasures. Farm-fresh eggs, boiled to perfect doneness, with yolks that stayed creamy golden rather than turning that unfortunate gray-green of overcooked eggs. Sarah's technique involved starting them in cold water, bringing to a rolling boil, then removing from heat and letting them sit exactly 12 minutes before plunging into ice water. This precision ensured that when sliced, each egg would reveal a perfect golden center surrounded by pristine white. The assembly required the patience of a master craftsman. Half the meat mixture would be shaped carefully in the bottom of her well-greased loaf pan, creating a cradle for the eggs. The hard-boiled eggs, peeled with the care reserved for precious objects, would be nestled end to end down the center like a secret spine, positioned so that every slice would reveal at least one perfect circle. The remaining meat mixture would be gently pressed over and around the eggs, sealing them in their savory tomb while maintaining the loaf's traditional shape. During the hour-long baking process at 350 degrees, Sarah would resist the urge to peek, knowing that opening the oven would release the heat needed to create the perfect texture, firm enough to slice cleanly but tender enough to melt on the tongue. The loaf would emerge golden brown and slightly pulled away from the pan's edges, ready for its moment of glory. The real magic happened at the table, when slices revealed perfect egg circles that made everyone exclaim with delight while reaching for seconds. Children would count the egg slices on their plates like discovering buried treasure, while adults marveled at the ingenuity that transformed Tuesday night dinner into an event worthy of celebration. Each bite combined the savory richness of well-seasoned beef with the creamy luxury of perfectly cooked egg, creating flavors that were both familiar and surprising. What made Meatloaf Surprise particularly special was how it turned everyday dinner into an event that children remembered years later and requested for their own birthdays, proving that the best family traditions often came from simple innovations that created lasting memories. Sarah would watch from the kitchen doorway as families discovered the hidden eggs, their faces lighting up with the same wonder she'd felt as a child at her grandmother's table. The Birmingham News featured it as the meatloaf that brings drama to dinner in their 1979 family entertainment series, noting how Sarah's creation proved that home cooking could compete with any restaurant's presentation when creativity met technique. Modern gastropubs charge $17.99 for Scotch egg meatloaf, variations of what cost $1 to create excitement for 8 people back then. Hot dog crown casserole. Who decided that hot dogs arranged like a royal crown could make macaroni and cheese feel like a celebration? Step into the creative kingdom of Valley View Community Church in Phoenix, 1982, where youth director Michelle Torres transforms ordinary kid food into something that makes children feel like royalty at church suppers. The brilliance wasn't just in the visual drama, but in how the hot dogs contributed smoky flavor while creating portion control that parents secretly appreciated. Michelle's breakthrough came during a particularly challenging youth group meeting when she was trying to convince 12 restless 8-year-olds that church dinners could be as exciting as birthday parties. She'd been staring at a package of hot dogs and a box of macaroni, wondering how to make institutional food feel special, when her daughter's plastic crown from a fast food restaurant caught her eye. The connection was instantaneous. Why not make the food itself look like a crown? The foundation had to be perfect. Real macaroni and cheese, not the powdered variety that tasted like orange dust. Michelle would cook elbow macaroni until just tender, never mushy, then create a cheese sauce from scratch using real butter, flour, whole milk, and sharp cheddar that she'd grate herself for maximum meltability. The secret ingredient was a whisper of mustard powder that added complexity without announcing itself, and a pinch of white pepper that provided heat without visible specks. The hot dogs required their own careful selection, the all-beef variety that would hold their shape during baking rather than the mystery meat versions that would shrivel into unrecognizable nuggets. She'd slice them into perfect rounds, each piece thick enough to maintain its identity, but thin enough to cook evenly, creating dozens of little pink circles that would transform into something magnificent. The assembly process became a meditation in symmetry. Michelle would spread the creamy mac and cheese in round baking dishes, creating a golden canvas that would become the base of her edible kingdom. Then came the crown jewels. Hot dog slices arranged in overlapping circles around the rim like a magnificent tiara, each piece positioned with the precision of a jeweler setting precious stones. The outer ring would overlap slightly with the casserole's edge, creating the illusion that the crown was floating above its cheesy kingdom. Here's where it gets incredible. During the 30-minute baking process at 350 degrees, the hot dogs would brown slightly, while the mac and cheese bubbled up around them, creating a dish that looked fancy, but tasted like pure childhood comfort. The edges of the hot dog slices would curl slightly, giving them dimensional character that enhanced their crown-like appearance, while their smoky flavor infused the cheese sauce with a complexity that made adults wonder about the secret ingredient. The presentation moment was pure theater. Michelle would carry each casserole dish to the children's table with the ceremony of a royal food taster, watching as young eyes widened at the sight of their crowns. The kids would debate who had the most elaborate crown, counting hot dog slices like precious gems, while parents marveled at how simple ingredients could create such excitement. What made this dish legendary was how it elevated humble ingredients into something that made kids feel special while satisfying adult nostalgia for simpler times when food was fun rather than a source of anxiety. Children who'd been reluctant church supper attendees suddenly became enthusiastic participants, asking when they could have crown food again and requesting the recipe for their own birthday parties. The technique proved so popular that Michelle began creating variations for different seasons, arranging the hot dogs like flower petals for spring events, or creating star patterns for patriotic gatherings. Each variation maintained the same principle of transforming ordinary ingredients through creative presentation that made children feel like the meal was designed specifically for them. The Phoenix Gazette called it the casserole that makes kids feel royal in their 1983 Family Fun feature, noting how Michelle's creation proved that the best children's food combined nutrition with imagination in equal measures. Modern gourmet mac and cheese shops charge $14.49 for what cost 85 cents to create coronation magic back then, proving that sometimes the most valuable innovations come from understanding what makes children happy. Salmon noodle ring. Could canned salmon really become elegant enough for special occasions when molded in a bundt pan? Enter the sophisticated kitchen of St. Catherine's Episcopal Church in Charleston, 1975, where cook Margaret Rutledge proves that presentation can transform humble ingredients into something worthy of silver serving spoons. The genius wasn't just in the molding, but in how the ring shape created perfect portion control while making ordinary ingredients look restaurant elegant. Margaret's culinary philosophy had been shaped by her years as a young wife during the Depression, when making modest ingredients appear abundant required both creativity and pride. She'd learned from her mother that food should nourish both body and spirit, and that even the simplest meals could be elevated through thoughtful presentation that showed respect for both the ingredients and the people being served. The revelation came during a particularly lean month when the church budget couldn't stretch to fresh seafood for their annual spring luncheon, yet the occasion demanded something more impressive than the usual tuna casserole. Margaret stood in her pantry, staring at cans of salmon and wondering how to transform this humble protein into something that wouldn't embarrass the congregation's finest china. The salmon selection required a discerning eye. She'd choose only the premium red variety, never the pink salmon that would create a pale, unappetizing result. Each can would be opened with ceremony and examined for quality, the contents drained and carefully flaked with a fork, removing every trace of skin or bone that might compromise the final texture. The salmon's natural oils would be preserved, knowing they'd contribute richness that no sauce could replicate. The noodle component demanded equal attention. Wide egg noodles, cooked just until tender but never soft, would provide structure without competing with the salmon's delicate flavor. Margaret would cook them in salted water with a bay leaf, then drain and rinse with cool water to stop the cooking process, ensuring they'd maintain their shape during the baking process that lay ahead. The binding mixture became her canvas for subtle flavoring. Fresh eggs, beaten until ribbony, would provide structure, while whole milk added richness that transformed the humble ingredients into something approaching luxury. Fresh breadcrumbs, made from day-old bread that she'd dried and grated herself, would absorb excess moisture while adding texture that prevented the ring from becoming dense or soggy. But the secret ingredient was fresh dill, chopped so fine it distributed like green confetti throughout the mixture, adding a bright herbaceous note that made everyone wonder about her mysterious seasoning. A whisper of lemon zest provided acidity that enhanced the salmon's natural flavors without overwhelming them, while white pepper contributed heat without visible specks that might mar the ring's pristine appearance. The molding process required the precision of a master baker. Margaret would grease her bundt pan with butter, then dust with fine breadcrumbs to ensure easy release, knowing that a broken ring would destroy the entire visual effect she was creating. The salmon mixture would be packed gently but firmly, eliminating air pockets that could cause structural failure during baking while maintaining the light texture that would make each bite feel luxurious rather than dense. The 45-minute baking process at 350 degrees became a meditation in patience. Margaret would resist the urge to check progress, knowing that opening the oven door would release steam needed to create the proper texture. The ring would emerge golden brown and slightly pulled away from the pan's edges, ready for the most dramatic moment of the entire process. The real magic was in the unmolding moment when the ring emerged perfect and impressive, ready to be filled with creamy dill sauce that made everyone forget this started with canned fish. Margaret would run a knife around the edges, invert the pan onto her best serving platter, then lift away the bunt pan with the confidence of someone who'd perfected the technique through dozens of practice runs. The center cavity would be filled with a sauce made from sour cream, mayonnaise, fresh dill, and lemon juice, a cool, creamy complement that transformed each bite into something that belonged in Charleston's finest restaurants. Garnished with lemon slices and fresh dill sprigs, the completed ring looked like sculpture that happened to be edible. What made Salmon Noodle Ring particularly valuable was how it proved that elegant presentation could elevate any ingredient, making budget meals feel like special occasions worthy of the church's finest china and crystal. Ladies would request the recipe in whispers, as if Margaret had shared state secrets, while gentlemen would compliment the chef with the kind of praise usually reserved for much more expensive dishes. The Charleston Post and Courier featured it as the dish that dresses up for dinner in their 1976 entertaining series, noting how Margaret's creation proved that Southern hospitality could transform even canned goods into gracious dining experiences. Modern seafood restaurants charge $19.99 for similar molded presentations of what cost $110 to create this impressive centerpiece back then, demonstrating that true elegance comes from technique and care rather than expensive ingredients. Old-fashioned baked rice pudding. How did leftover rice become the most requested dessert at every church supper? Picture the patient kitchen of Mount Zion Methodist Church in Vermont, 1977, where cook Eleanor Maple transforms humble grains into creamy, spiced perfection that makes everyone forget about fancy cakes and pies. The brilliance wasn't just in the simplicity, but in how slow baking created custard-like richness that no stovetop method could achieve. Eleanor discovered her technique during a particularly harsh January when fresh ingredients were scarce, and the church pantry held little more than basics. What started as necessity became legendary when she combined day-old rice with whole milk, farm-fresh eggs, pure cane sugar, Madagascar vanilla, Ceylon cinnamon, and plump California raisins that had been soaking in warm water to restore their sweetness. The transformation began when she gently whisked beaten eggs into the milk, creating the custard base that would give the pudding its signature silky texture. You'd combine the cooked rice with the milk mixture, letting the grains absorb the creamy richness while folding in the vanilla-scented sugar. The raisins, now plump and jewel-like, would be scattered throughout like sweet surprises waiting to burst with concentrated fruit flavor. But here's where Eleanor's genius showed. She'd dust everything with freshly grated nutmeg and a whisper of cardamom that elevated the humble dessert into something worthy of special occasions. The baking process required patience that modern kitchens have forgotten. Into a 325-degree oven it would go, baking low and slow for nearly 2 hours, while Eleanor stirred every 30 minutes to prevent the dreaded skin formation that would ruin the pudding's perfect texture. Here's where it gets magical. The long, gentle cooking would transform simple ingredients into something that tasted like it had been lovingly tended for hours, which it had. The rice would break down slightly, releasing its starches to thicken the custard while maintaining enough structure to provide satisfying texture in every spoonful. What made this dessert particularly special was how it proved that patience created flavors that couldn't be rushed, and how leftover rice could become more beloved than the original meal. Church members would arrive early, hoping for extra helpings, and Eleanor often found herself making double batches to satisfy demand. The Burlington Free Press called it the dessert that turns time into flavor in their 1978 comfort food series, noting how the pudding embodied the best of New England's frugal yet generous spirit. Modern comfort food restaurants charge $8.99 for what cost 40 cents to transform leftover rice into pure satisfaction back then, proving that true luxury comes not from expensive ingredients, but from time and care invested in simple pleasures. Strawberry Jell-O Poke Cake. Who discovered that poking holes in cake and pouring Jell-O through them could create pure visual magic? Step into the colorful kitchen of Sunnydale Community Church in California, 1979, where cook Patricia Wong creates dessert theater that makes children squeal with delight and adults remember why they loved being kids. The genius wasn't just in the technique, but in how the Jell-O created beautiful marbled patterns while adding moisture and flavor that made ordinary cake extraordinary. Patricia's inspiration came from watching her daughter play with a toy that created designs by pushing colored liquid through small holes. She wondered if the same principle could work with dessert, and her first experiment with a simple white cake became the talk of the entire congregation. The technique required precise timing and the right tools, but the results were nothing short of spectacular. Starting with a basic white cake mix prepared according to package directions, the magic began the moment the cake emerged from the oven. While still warm and tender, Patricia would use a large meat fork to poke holes across the entire surface, creating a grid pattern roughly an inch apart. The holes needed to go deep enough to reach the bottom, but not so aggressive as to destroy the cake's structure, a delicate balance that took practice to perfect. The Jell-O preparation required its own precision. Strawberry gelatin mixed with exactly 1 cup of boiling water, stirred until completely dissolved with no granules remaining, then tempered with half a cup of cold water. The temperature had to be just right. Too hot would melt the cake. Too cool would set before penetrating properly. Patricia would pour the liquid slowly and systematically, watching as the ruby-red mixture disappeared into each hole like liquid rainbows seeking their path through the tender crumb. The real magic happened in the refrigerator, where the Jell-O would set over several hours, creating gorgeous red veins throughout the white cake that looked like stained glass when sliced. Each piece revealed a unique pattern, as if the cake had been individually hand-painted by an artist. The final touch came with billowy whipped topping spread across the surface, creating a pristine white canvas that made the red veins underneath even more dramatic when revealed with each cut. What made strawberry poke cake particularly revolutionary was how it combined the satisfying process of cake decorating with foolproof results that impressed everyone regardless of artistic skill. Even novice bakers could create professional-looking desserts that drew gasps of admiration at potluck dinners. The Los Angeles Times featured it as the cake that makes art edible in their 1980 family dessert series, noting how the technique democratized beautiful dessert presentation. Modern bakeries charge $12.99 for similar decorated cakes that cost 90 cents to create this visual spectacle back then, proving that innovation often comes from playful experimentation rather than expensive ingredients or complicated techniques. Cherry pineapple dump cake. Could dessert really be as simple as dumping ingredients in a pan and walking away? Enter the revolutionary simplicity of Faith Baptist Church in Georgia, 1981, where busy cook Carol Henderson discovers that sometimes the best techniques are no techniques at all, just good ingredients and time. The brilliance wasn't just in the ease, but in how the cake mix would absorb fruit juices while creating its own crust, delivering homemade taste without any of the homemade work. Carol's discovery happened during one of the busiest weeks in church history, when 3 different committees needed desserts, and she had barely enough time to sleep, let alone spend hours in the kitchen. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and she found herself staring at a can of cherry pie filling, wondering if there was any way to stretch it into something that would feed 50 people without requiring pastry skills she didn't have time to employ. The solution came from pure necessity and a little bit of faith. Cherry pie filling formed the sweet, glossy base, its deep red color promising richness and satisfaction. Crushed pineapple, drained but not too thoroughly, added tropical brightness that would balance the cherry's intensity while contributing additional moisture that would work its magic during baking. The genius move was sprinkling dry yellow cake mix directly over the fruit. No mixing, no measuring wet ingredients, just an even layer that would transform through the alchemy of butter and heat. The butter had to be real butter, not margarine, cut into small pieces and scattered across the cake mix like golden polka dots. Each piece would melt during baking, working its way down through the dry mix and combining with the fruit juices below to create something that was part cake, part cobbler, and entirely delicious. Chopped pecans provided the final touch, their buttery crunch creating textural interest that elevated the dessert from simple to sophisticated. Here's where it gets incredible. The butter would melt and work with fruit juices to moisten the cake mix, creating a cobbler-like top, while the fruit stayed saucy and perfect underneath. The transformation happened without any intervention, like watching a magic trick performed by heat and time instead of sleight of hand. What emerged from the oven looked like something that required hours of careful preparation, but actually demanded nothing more than the ability to open cans and scatter ingredients. The technique proved so successful that Carol began experimenting with variations: apple pie, filling with cinnamon cake mix, blueberry with lemon, peach with spice cake, each combination creating its own unique flavor profile while maintaining the same foolproof simplicity. What made dump cake particularly valuable was how it solved the dessert dilemma for cooks who wanted homemade taste without homemade time, delivering results that tasted like hours of work in under an hour. The Atlanta Constitution called it the dessert that dumps difficulty in their 1982 Busy Cook series, praising how the technique made impressive desserts accessible to even the most time-pressed home cooks. Modern farm-to-table restaurants charge $10.99 for similar rustic fruit desserts that cost 70 cents to dump together back then, proving that sometimes the best innovations come from necessity rather than culinary school training. But wait until you see how pineapple upside-down cake creates the flip that stops the room, transforming ordinary ingredients through the drama of inversion into a dessert that looks like it belongs in a magazine but tastes like childhood memories made tangible. Pineapple upside-down cake. What made the moment of flipping this cake feel like kitchen magic that could go wonderfully right or terribly wrong? Picture the dramatic finale happening at Cornerstone Presbyterian Church in Hawaii, 1976, where cook Maria Santos creates dessert theater that makes everyone hold their breath until the pan is lifted to reveal caramelized perfection. The genius wasn't just in the presentation, but in how brown sugar and butter created a glaze that transformed simple fruit into something that looked like it came from the finest pastry shop. Pineapple rings, maraschino cherries, brown sugar, butter, yellow cake batter, and the courage to flip a whole pan upside down in one confident motion. You'd melt butter with brown sugar in the bottom of cast-iron skillets, arrange pineapple rings like golden halos with cherries in the centers, pour cake batter over everything, bake until golden, then flip quickly onto serving plates while still warm. The real magic was in that heart-stopping moment, when you lifted the pan to reveal whether the fruit had stayed perfectly arranged or created abstract art instead. What made pineapple upside-down cake particularly special was how it combined baking skill with performance art, creating dessert that tasted amazing regardless of how the flip turned out. The Honolulu Star-Bulletin featured it as the cake that brings drama to dessert in their 1977 Island cooking series. Modern Hawaiian restaurants charge $15.49 for what cost $1 to create this show-stopping finale back then. These 30 forgotten recipes prove that the best comfort food came from church kitchens where creativity met necessity and love made everything taste better. Each dish tells the story of American ingenuity, community spirit, and the magic that happens when simple ingredients meet generous hearts. The next time you're looking for something that feeds both body and soul, remember these classics that turned ordinary meals into extraordinary memories.